Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. It started like most ordinary mornings. Coffee, the familiar rustle of morning papers, and the routine of preparing for another bright day on set. But there was a phone call that came in between scripted lines and camera rehearsals, a call that would nudge a perfectly arranged life off its axis. In our story, Kelly discovers a family secret, a diagnosis, a near miss or long-kept worry that finally demanded to be named. She faces it quietly at first, in the hush between cue cards. She told almost no one, except one person, and that confession begins a chain we couldn't have predicted. Everyone has a person they turn to when the world is rattling. For her, it's the person who knows the breezes that make her laugh and the hush that makes her cry. That confiding moment, a whispered, "I'm scared," reshapes both their days. Support comes in the smallest acts, an extra hand on the grocery bag, staying up late, listening without offering solutions. It's the ordinary tenderness that anchors extraordinary times. But being brave together doesn't make the world stop. It only makes the next moment harder to bear. Public life teaches you a kind of performance, schedules, smiles, and a microphone. But private fear pulls at the costume. There's pressure to keep the show running, not just for contracts, but for viewers who find comfort and routine in those familiar faces. In this tale, she wrestles with a decision: protect the show and the public's joy, or step back and tend to the fragile interior. The choice would come in a single televised morning, a moment where truth and television collide. On the day she decides to tell the crew, the world watches a different kind of broadcast. The cameras roll, but the conversation that morning is quieter, more human. The script pauses. People in the studio and millions at home feel the shift. Millions of viewers, many in their 60s like you, have built lives around this ritual, and now that ritual becomes the very place where grief is allowed to come forward. But not everyone applauds. Some react with confusion, others with deep compassion, and one note of criticism will spread like wildfire. Whenever private pain moves into the public lane, the internet hums. There will always be strangers who judge quickly. There will always be headlines that miss the point. Yet, in parallel, 1,000 letters arrive, postcards, emails, emergency prayers. People who once watched from their kitchens now write with recipes and memories, sharing small kindnesses. In this story, the backlash is real, but it's matched and eventually overwhelmed by the flood of love. A single voice online attempts to define her pain as spectacle, and that voice forces her to decide how she will answer. Instead of retreating, she chooses to show up, not to perform, but to invite. She opens a conversation about vulnerability and aging, about the private realities we all carry. Her words are measured, honest, and quiet. They catch a nation's ear not because of scandal, but because of their candor. Viewers who've lived through hard things recognize themselves. And in the audience that day sits one person who will change the next act of the story. A letter arrives from a woman who watched the show as a child and now recalls the comfort it gave her during lonely years. She writes about her own hidden losses: a spouse, a small business swallowed by recession, a child grown distant. In that letter, the grief of one heart finds another. It's the kind of exchange that rewrites pain into purpose. The letter ends with a request. Could the show do something not for ratings, but for people like her? In the days that follow, the studio becomes a hub for quieter work, support groups, fundraisers, conversations about caregiving and grief. The production team, long used to cue cards and marketers, learns to listen. This pivot is risky. Sponsors worry, ratings executives wring their hands, but the story chooses something bolder.
Not everyone signs on. A crucial partner balks, and that decision will force an even more daring move. When a major sponsor pulls back, threatened by controversy, the team faces a budget cliff. There's talk of scaling back, of reverting to the safe, familiar formulas. Yet sometimes, when you're facing an end, you discover a new beginning. The show's host decides to fundraise directly, not flashy telethons, but honest appeals to viewers' own stories and wallets. It's a gamble that asks people to invest in each other. On the final night of the drive, a surprise call comes in that rewrites the plan. An anonymous donor, a retired farmer from a small town who once watched the host as a child, writes a note and gives a generous sum. He says, "You helped my wife through chemo on those mornings when we had nothing but the radio for comfort. Now help someone else." This act of reciprocity lifts the team. It shows how the decades of small kindnesses ripple outward. That generosity sparks others. Soon help comes in ways no one could have budgeted for. Support groups sprout in living rooms, churches, community centers. Neighbors check on neighbors. People in their 60s, the very viewers who grew up with this show, start local chapters to help caregivers and lonely seniors. The heartbreak that began in a studio becomes a network of human connection. Yet for the person at the center, the struggle continues. Healing is not linear. Behind the scenes, there are late nights and halting steps forward. Therapy sessions, whispered apologies, the small rituals that steady the day. There's a scene you will never see on television, sitting alone, listening to a record from 1985, picking up an old photograph and letting the tears come. Those moments matter because they are real. One such night brings a decision that surprises everyone. She chooses to take a brief leave, not to vanish, but to heal. The announcement is honest and simple. "I need time to be okay." Reactions vary. Some viewers worry. Others write saying, "Take all the time you need. We'll be here." This pause opens a new chapter. In absence, we learn what matters. But absence also raises questions. Who will carry the light while she is gone? A rotating cast of colleagues step into the void. They carry the laughter, the interviews, the breakfasts. For the first time in years, the show becomes a chorus rather than a solo. It's not just an operational shift, it's symbolic, a reminder that when one voice rests, many voices can sustain a tradition. And from that chorus comes a story that brings tears to everyone. One morning, she walks into a small community center to see a wall covered with notes, stories of strength and survival, taped there by the people she inspired. There are photos of reunions, recipes for courage, a knitted blanket from a woman who found comfort in the show during a dark winter. The scene is simple, but its impact is enormous. She realizes her pain helped others find their courage. In that moment, she makes a vow, and that vow surprises even her closest friends. Returning to the studio, she announces a new initiative, a small fund for caregivers, resources for those with chronic illness, and an ongoing space for quiet conversations on air. It's not glamour, it's practical and patient. It's the kind of project that builds over years, not quarters. The nation watches, and many in their 60s nod. This is the work they always...
But old habits die hard. A testing moment arrives, one that will ask her to choose between spectacle and sincerity. A big producer pitches a segment that promises ratings, a sensationalized story tied loosely to her crisis. It's packaged with flashy graphics, tearful reenactments, and promises of clicks. The team is tempted. Ratings could fund every philanthropic idea they have, but at what cost? The moment calls for courage. Choose the easy headline or the harder, truer path. She pauses, looks at a photo of her mother, and remembers something important. Her mother taught her to tell one truth at a time, to never build a story on someone's sorrow without their permission. That memory becomes a compass. They rework the segment into something quieter. Real people telling real stories without theatrics, with resources clearly listed for viewers who need help. Ratings drop slightly, but something else grows.
trust. Trust brings its own rewards, and an unexpected guest arrives to prove it. A guest comes on air, a retired teacher who lost a partner years ago and rebuilt a life through community. Her words connect decades. "We all carry losses," she says, "but we carry them differently." Viewers call in, share their own stories, and the show becomes less about one person and more about the quiet ways ordinary lives survive. One caller, however, changes the direction of the initiative. A caller from a small town explains how the show's resources could help a local clinic that treats the elderly. This direct appeal becomes the pilot for a mobile outreach program, volunteers who travel to rural counties to deliver companionship, medical checkups, and conversation. It's a modest effort, but it echoes the mid-century neighborliness many of our viewers remember fondly.